Like it or not, Johnny Test is the archetypal TV show of the mid-2000s animation, in that it occupies this transitional period of animation between the thick line style that defined the late 90s and early 2000s, and the thin line style that has come to define the 2010s and beyond. To know the art style of Johnny Test, you need to look at two things: its predecessors and the medium used to create its animation. Johnny Test has shown to take influence from the same type of shows that influenced famous creators like Lauren Faust, Genndy Tartakovsky, and Butch Hartman. That is, they drew from the styles of the dark age of animation, as it's referred to. The backgrounds in all iterations of the show are abstracted in a manner similar to the Art Deco style that characterized the studios like Hanna-Barbera and UPA. The character designs themselves also share this heritage, which each of them primarily being shown in 3/4 view, and all of them having very distinct silhouettes. You'll also note that these clips of the first season feature very thick lines, much like those other shows. Johnny Test is by no means the most original of stories, but its strength lies in the cast of characters that play off each other fairly well. An average episode can usually be summarized as thus: Johnny will usually have a desire or problem that he'll pester his genius sisters about. Chances are they will do it if he tests out their latest invention, which is either something for the university or to win over the airhead next door, Gil. After testing the faulty invention, the sisters will usually revert Johnny back to normal and will give him what he wants, which often backfires horribly, or in some cases, all too well. It usually falls to the sisters and his talking dog Dookie to fix Johnny before his parents can find out and ground all of them forever. Other times, Johnny may instigate the conflict on his own, taking one of his sister's inventions to show off to the kids at school. However, there are often other scenarios that feature villains. There's Bling Bling Boy, who's madly in love with Susan Test, usually trying to ransom her into dating him. There were the mole people who were a problem once or twice. Of course, there was a Star Wars ripoff, Dark Vegan, and there were also the secret agents Mr. Black and Mr. White. They either will wind up having an interest in the sisters' latest invention and try to steal it, or simply come to them to commission a project or solve a problem that they need to do in order to get their vacation to Fiji. The strange thing is, most of these characters were introduced very early on, and were able to sustain a level of relatively average consistency and writing quality. Usually the weaker episodes being the ones where Johnny is particularly abrasive towards Dookie and his sisters. It's normally a bad idea to have your main character be a complete jerk unless you can really humanize them with a good backstory and some redeeming qualities. Johnny Test is not a very story-driven show, so he will frequently teeter on this line between being a rash kid that doesn't think about his actions and just a complete doofus. Thankfully, there is his talking dog Dookie that is the voice of reason for both Johnny and the sisters. The other character that really stood out to me was Bling Bling Boy. I find the idea of an egomaniacal kid trying to take over the world only to get reprimanded by his mother hilarious. Never will I get tired of that. Unfortunately, the rest of the show did get tiring, especially when it started to change studio hands every few seasons. As many know, Johnny Test began its life as a show that utilized more traditional methods of animation, that being hand-drawn cell animation, the most telltale sign of it being not only the thick lines, but also the variation of line weight on the drawings themselves, along with unique expressions for certain scenes. But that is not exclusive to purely hand-drawn animation. It is, however, more expensive to do, and by the show's second season, the budget for the show was drastically cut due to a company merger between UPN and WB, making the CW television network. The show would go from being joint produced by Warner Bros. Entertainment and Studio B of MLP fame to Cookie Jar Animation. With the merger not only came changes in staff, but also the budget, forcing the production to switch to using Adobe Flash, now known as Adobe Animate. While Flash does allow for a lot of time-saving techniques, a tool is only as good as the hand wielding it. Plus, good animation takes time, even with these techniques. Spending more time on animation costs money, which by Season 2 was not as large as there once was, so the quality took a minor hit. The show lost its thick, varied lines for thin lines, however the overall animation quality did not take so much of a hit. Season 1's animation was not particularly expensive in comparison to other shows at the time. On top of that, Cookie Jar also assisted in production of the first season. So while a lot of the show's production staff was dropped, come Season 2, there was still enough to keep the admittedly middle-of-the-road quality going for another 2 seasons. The show would then change animation studios once more to Atomic Cartoons, with assistance from 17 Inc. and the Philippine Animators Group. However, the show's quality would largely plateau for Seasons 4 and 5, save for the natural writer's rot that comes from long-running shows. Come Season 6, this would change. Season 6 is the one that people remember the most when it comes to Johnny Test. At this point, the show went from just another cartoon on Cartoon Network to a channel darling, being aired for large swaths of time until people got sick of it. By 2013, Season 6 premiered on Cartoon Network, and it was clear that the network had its priorities on series that would come to define that era of the network, like Adventure Time, regular show, and one that came out the same year, Teen Titans Go. So, what was the show like at this time? Well, at this time, the overall animation quality was far more stiff than where it was after the first studio change. Though, what many take issue is not necessarily the animation quality, rather, how it's punctuated by a particularly infamous sound effect.
Oh, man. Attack!
Let's step back for a moment and talk a little bit about normally used techniques in TV animation, which slightly differs from that used in feature film. Mainly that animation for TV tends to have snappier movements, going quickly from pose to pose whenever possible, in order to be time efficient. For the most part, this works, so long as those poses are solid and read well. People usually don't mind this technique. So, whose idea was it to draw attention to this by putting a whip crack on every time a character changes pose? Now, the show did have a decent library of sound effects, but the over-reliance on 3 variations of whip cracks essentially drowned out any other sound effect that's being used. This makes the show extremely obnoxious to watch, which is likely one of the reasons why it ended after that season. That is, until recently. It's no secret that there are many reboots these days of film series, comics do it on a semi-annual basis at times, and of course, cartoon series. So does it come as a surprise that Johnny Test is getting a revival? For a short amount of time, it was going to get a web series, but Netflix, being the eater of projects abandoned by other networks, decided to pick it up for 2 seasons. Will it be any good? I don't know. Is there really a place for it in the modern era? While there are definitely shows that are episodic like Tests, do pick up a following, tend to have more fleshed out characters, or are shows that do have a continuous story to some degree. Doubly so for shows on Netflix. Can Johnny Test compete with the likes of Kipo, Green Eggs and Ham, and the slew of other TV shows at the tips of viewers' fingers? Can it survive without being assisted by a heavily unbalanced schedule? Given the nature of Johnny Test being this midpoint between the 2 styles, I doubt there would be much nostalgia for it. And since it will likely lack those elements that other popular modern shows have, it will need to rely on humor to carry it. Time will tell if that works out for the show.